The strangest thing I ever found in the backcountry wasn't a relic or a bone, or even a sign of old settlement. It was a camera. Not a sleek modern one either. It was an old Kodak, the kind with the metal body and a winding lever, sitting half buried in the dirt beside a rotted log along a forgotten section of trail near the Shenandoah wilderness. I was hiking solo that weekend, hoping for quiet and maybe a glimpse of the late fall colours before the snow came in. The leaves were mostly gone, the forest bare except for the rustle of oak leaves underfoot. The world felt emptied out, until that glint of metal caught my eye. The camera looked as though it had been there for years, maybe decades. The leather strap had dry rotted and fallen away, and a thin layer of moss had started to claim one side. I remember brushing it off with my sleeve and feeling the cold metal against my palm. It was heavier than I expected, still solid. The winding lever moved stiffly, but it moved. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pried open the back. Inside was a roll of film, the paper backing darkened but intact. Now, I'm no expert, but I could tell it was the kind of film they stopped making ages ago. Whatever was on that roll had survived years of rain, snow and sun. For a moment, I just stood there under the grey sky, camera in hand, and wondered, who had carried it? A hiker like me? A ranger? Maybe someone from the days when these woods were still dotted with old homesteads. The mystery of it pressed at me harder than I expected. I slipped it into my pack, thinking I'd find someone who could at least develop the film. That night, I made camp by an old stone chimney, the last remnant of a farmhouse that must have burned long ago. The fire cracked softly, throwing sparks into the cold air. I set the camera on a rock beside me and stared at it like it might start talking. The more I looked at it, the more personal it seemed, like holding someone's last message. I remember thinking about all the other things lost in these hills. Letters, voices, stories. The idea that this little machine and the smell of wet leaves. I passed the rusted skeleton of a car, half swallowed by vines, and wondered if whoever owned it might have carried that same camera once. The road to memory feels strange like that. You start to imagine ghosts in every shadow. Around midday, I stopped at a clearing where an old stone foundation stood, moss climbing the walls. The shape of it reminded me of the chimney I'd camped by. A little further, I found a rusted horseshoe nailed to a tree. The woods here were littered with pieces of forgotten lives. The camera didn't seem so out of place anymore. It was just another echo from someone who'd passed through. When I finally reached the ranger station, a man named Carlyle was on duty. He was grey-bearded, slow-spoken, the kind of person who treats silence like part of the conversation. I told him where I'd found the camera and showed it to him. He turned it over in his hands for a long moment, then said, "You might want to talk to Ruth over in Luray. She runs the little history museum there, knows more about this valley than anyone left alive." That evening, I camped near a small creek at the forest's edge. The water ran shallow and cold over smooth stones, and I listened to it while I cooked a bit of rice on my tiny stove. The firelight glinted on the camera's body, and I thought again about the film inside. I imagined photographs, faces long gone, or maybe just trees and streams that had changed with time. A life frozen in silver grains, trapped for years under that log, waiting for someone to find it. The night grew colder. The fire's warmth reached only so far, and in the stillness, I thought I heard the faintest sound, like the soft click of a shutter. Just the trees settling, I told myself. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the camera wanted to be seen again. that its owner had left it there on purpose. A silent breadcrumb in the wilderness, waiting for a stranger to follow its trail. The next morning dawned bright and brittle, sunlight scattering across the frost like crushed glass. I set out for Luray with the camera wrapped in a spare shirt, tucked deep in my paper. Inside, the walls were lined with black and white photographs, families in front of clapboard houses, men with saws and mules, women in long skirts standing by gardens that were now just clearings in the forest. It felt like walking through the camera's memories before I even opened it. Ruth was everything the ranger had promised, sharp-eyed, curious, with a voice that carried the patience of someone used to listening. When I showed her the camera, she drew in a breath. "That's a Kodak Retina, early 50s model," she said, running her fingers over the metal casing. "You said you found it up near Tanner's Ridge." I nodded. She gave me a long look, then went to a filing cabinet and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings. "Photographer missing in Shenandoah National Park." The photo beside the headline showed a smiling man with a square jaw and a worn field jacket. Martin Cole, 1963. Ruth explained that Cole had spent weeks documenting the last families to leave the mountains when the park expanded. Some said he'd fallen while trying to reach an abandoned homestead. Others believed he'd simply gotten lost and never found his way out. No trace had ever been discovered. Until, maybe, now. We both sat quiet for a while, the weight of the story hanging between us. She offered to take the film to a specialist she knew in Charlottesville who could handle old, fragile negatives. I agreed, though part of me hesitated, as if opening that camera might disturb something sacred, some ghost that preferred to stay asleep under the moss. Still, when I handed it to her, my fingers lingered on the cold metal and I whispered, barely thinking about it, "Let's see what you wanted us to remember." It took 2 weeks before Ruth called me back. By then, I was home again, back in the rhythm of ordinary life. Coffee in the mornings, the hum of traffic outside my window. But my thoughts kept wandering to that camera and what might be sealed inside it. When the call finally came, her voice was steady but low, like someone carrying something delicate. "The film developed," she said. "You'd better come and see for yourself." I drove down to Luray that same afternoon, the blue ridge rising like a chimney. The same chimney I'd camped beside when I found the camera. I knew that shape instantly. The stones had the same lean, the same missing corner near the base. Ruth saw my reaction. "That one gave me chills too," she said softly. The next photo was stranger. It looked like it had been taken at dusk, the trees half silhouetted, the light fading. In the corner of the frame stood a figure, small, indistinct, maybe a woman in a long dress. Her face was turned away, but there was something haunting in her posture, as if she were waiting for someone. The last photo was almost entirely dark, except for a faint flare of light near the center, like a campfire seen through mist. On the edge of that glow was a shape that might have been a person, or might have been nothing at all. I sat for a long time, tracing the grainy edges with my eyes. "Do you think he died out there?" I asked finally. Ruth folded her hands, thoughtful. "Maybe. Or maybe he just left these behind for someone else to find. People like him were trying to hold on to something they knew was disappearing." That night, I stayed at the old inn down the road. I couldn't sleep. Those photographs burned in my mind, the chimney, the shadow, that lonely figure at dusk. Around midnight, I took a walk outside. The air smelled of wood smoke and the coming frost. In the distance, the ridgeline glowed faintly under the moon, and I found myself wondering if somewhere up there, under a blanket of leaves and time, Martin Cole had finally found his peace, or if he was still waiting, camera in hand, for someone to finish his story. I went back to Tanner's Ridge a week later. Maybe it was foolish, chasing ghosts never leads to much, but the pull of that place had gotten under my skin. The trailhead was empty, the air sharp with the scent of pine and cold earth. I carried a small pack, water, a notebook, and a copy of one of Martin's photographs Ruth had let me borrow, the one with the chimney. By midday I reached it again, standing just as it had in the picture, stoic and half swallowed by time. I sat near the same flat stone where I'd first see what he saw. As the fire burned low, I pulled from my pack an old disposable camera I'd brought along. I took one photo of the chimney, one of the trees, and one of the empty trail leading back toward the world. The flash burst white in the darkness, startling an owl from the branches above. I smiled, thinking Martin might have appreciated that small intrusion of light into the night. Before I left, I buried a copy of the photograph beside the chimney, sealed in a plastic sleeve inside a tin box. Not as a monument, just a gesture, a way of saying, I found you. You're remembered. The wind picked up, scattering ash and leaves over the disturbed soil, smoothing it all away again. When I finally reached my truck, dawn was just brushing the horizon. I took one last look toward the ridge. The world felt quieter, settled somehow, like a story that had found its ending. Even now, when I hike alone and catch the glint of sunlight on metal or glass, I stop for a moment. I listen to the woods and think of that forgotten camera, of the man who saw beauty in what others left behind. Some mysteries, I've learned, aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to remind us that every footprint fades, but not every story does.